Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Let's get started and look into our daily quiz. Before we start with our practice questions, we have two important announcements. BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS is happy to announce the National Scholarship Test, which is scheduled to be conducted on 19th of June 2022. How do you register? Follow the link given in the description box, give the necessary information, and you would be able to win some attractive scholarship. The second announcement is in reference to Target Mains 2022. Please do tune in from 7:30 to 9 p.m. live on a BYJU'S Exam Prep application. This is exclusively available on a BYJU'S Exam Prep application, and you will learn all the important topics from the mains examination point of view. Let's get started and look into the first question. Consider the following statements. The right to property ceased to be a fundamental right with the 42nd Constitutional Amendment in 1978. Doctrine of adverse possession refers to the power of government to take private property and convert into public use. Which of the above statements are correct? The answer to this is none. Why have we taken this practice question? Because this article on the Hindu makes a reference to Article 300A. Let us try and understand what is the option all about. When we look into the first option, the right to property ceased to be a fundamental right with the 42nd Constitutional Amendment in 1978. This is a wrong statement. Why? It is not 42nd Constitutional Amendment, but instead it is the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act. So it is not 42nd but 44. As a result, the first statement is wrong. When we look into right to property, remember, right to property was a fundamental right. As of now, it is a constitutional right, a legal right as well. So remember, there might be a question when it comes to the right to property. Right to property is not a fundamental right, but instead it is a constitutional right which is present under Article 300A. It is a constitutional right. It is also a legal right. It is also a statutory right because you also have Transfer of Property Act of 1882. Now if you look into Article 300A of the Indian Constitution, it says no person shall be deprived of the property save by the authority of law. This means that every person has the right to possess a property. However, the government also has the right to take away this property as well. So this particular principle where the government has that particular legitimate right to take a property of an individual is what is called as doctrine of eminent domain. So remember, it is not doctrine of adverse possession, but instead it is doctrine of eminent domain. So the doctrine of eminent domain refers to the power of the government to take private property and convert it into the public use. So if we are speaking about Article 300A of the Indian Constitution, what does it say? Every person has the right to possess the property. But if there is a legitimate purpose for the government for the public use, in that case they have to use the procedure established by law, pay some compensation as well, take this private property and can use it for the public property. So it is not the doctrine of adverse possession, but instead it is the doctrine of eminent domain. So what is this adverse possession? Adverse possession basically means, let's say there is an individual who has been living in that particular house for about 12 years. So this person eventually goes on to become the owner of that particular house in spite of him not owning any of the title papers. So an adverse possession basically means if a property is occupied by someone for more than 12 years, they will be favored towards in the court of law as not the owner but the possessor of that particular property, and eventually it may also become the property of that person as well. This is what is called as doctrine of adverse possession. Now let's look into the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? Population control and family planning is under the state list. The responsibility of conducting the decennial census rests with the Office of Registrar General and Census Commissioner under the Ministry of Home Affairs. According to National Family Health Survey, the current fertility rate is slightly lower than the replacement level of fertility of 2.1 children per woman. Which of the statements are correct? The answer to this is 2 and 3 only. Why have we taken this practice question? Because this article on the Hindu makes a reference to population. Let us try and understand what are the options. When we look into the first option, population control and family planning is not under the state list. It is under the concurrent list. So we have the union list, we have the state list, we have the concurrent list as well. So population control and family falls under the concurrent list. And if you look into entry item 20 of A, we have population control and family planning, where it clearly depicts what is in the concurrent list. So here we have the central government which should be able to make the laws. You also have the state governments which should be able to make the laws as well. So the first statement is wrong. When we look into the second statement, the responsibility of conducting the decennial census rests with the Office of Registrar General and Census Commissioner under the Ministry of Home Affairs. This is a right statement. So basically, the Registrar General and the Census Commissioner of India will arrange, conduct, analyze the results of the demographic surveys of India, including the Census of India and the Linguistic Survey of India as well. So the second statement is right. When we look into the third statement, according to National Family Health Survey 5, the current fertility rate is slightly lower than the replacement level of fertility of 2.1 children per woman. This statement once again is right. So according to National Family Health Survey 5, the current fertility rate is about 2, which is far less than what we had seen 4 to 5 years back. So the total fertility rate has declined from 2.2 children per woman in 2015 and 16 to about 2 children per woman in 2019 and 20. So the third statement is also right, and the answer to this would be 2 and 3. Now let's look into the next practice question. With respect to Press Council of India, which of the following statements are correct? It only has the power to enforce standards on the print media and has no powers to enforce standards on the electronic media. PCI is responsible for inquiring about complaints it receives and can also penalize anyone for the violation of the guidelines. Which of the statements are correct? The answer to this is one only. Why have we taken this practice question? Because this article on the Hindu makes a reference to the Press Council of India. Let us try and understand what are these options. When we look into the first option is right. It only has the power to enforce standards on the print media and has no powers to enforce standards on the electronic media. This statement is absolutely right. So when we speak about the print media, we have the newspapers, we also have something called like the magazines. All these are regulated by the Press Council of India, but it has no powers to enforce standards on the electronic media, which is to do with internet, social media. In fact, the visual media is also not coming under the control of the Press Council of India. The PCI is responsible for inquiring about the complaints it receives. This part is right, but when it comes to the second part, it can also penalize anyone for the violation of guidelines is not the right recommendation, or it is wrong because it does not have any power whatsoever to penalize it, but instead all that it has is some recommendatory structure and it is only advisory in nature. It has no penalizing power. Now if we have to look at the stats with respect to the Press Council of India, the objective of Press Council of India is to preserve the freedom of press and of maintaining improving standards of the press. It acts as the regulator that defines and discharges professional standards for the print media in India. So remember, this happens to be a statutory body, and because it is a statutory body, we also have a law called as the Press Council Act of 1978. So it is the apex body for the regulation of print media in India. The Press Council of India has the following composition. It has a chairman, and apart from the chairman, there are also 28 members. The chairman of the PCI is selected by 3 people, which includes chairman of Rajya Sabha, speaker of Lok Sabha, and a member selected by PCI. Kindly remember, this can also be very important from the preliminary examination point of view. Now, if you look into what are the functions, making sure that the newspapers are able to maintain their independence, set high standards for news for public consumption, keep a track on the developments that might obstruct the flow of information or news freely, build a code of conduct for the journalists for high professional standards, provide training to new journalists. These are some of the functions. But what are the limitations? It only has the power to enforce standards on print media and no powers to enforce standards on electronic media. Radio, television, internet all comes under electronic media, and this cannot be regulated by the Press Council of India. While enforcing the issue guidelines, it has limited powers. It cannot penalize anyone for the violation of the guidelines. These are some of the limitations with respect to the Press Council of India. Now let's look into the next practice question. Which of the following missiles are developed under the Integrated Guided Missile Development Program? We have Agni, Akash, Trishul, Prithvi. The answer to this is 1, 2, 3 and 4 only. Why have we taken this practice question? Because this article on the PIB makes a reference to Prithvi too. When we speak about Prithvi, there are three types of Prithvi. What are those? One, which has a range of about 150 km. Prithvi 2 has a range of about 250 km and Prithvi 3 has a range of about 350 km. So the range of Prithvi 2 missile happens to be 250 km and the Prithvi missile is indigenously developed missile by the DRDO under the flagship of the Integrated Guided Missile Developmental Program. And this program was launched back in the year 1983 and it was launched with an agenda to develop 5 missile systems in the country which included Trishul, Akash, Nag, Prithvi and Agni. Please remember this can be very important from the preliminary examination point of view. So if we speak about Prithvi, this happens to be a short range surface to surface ballistic missile. If we speak about Agni, this happens to be an intermediate range surface to surface ballistic missile. Then if we speak about Trishul, this happens to be a short range low level surface to air missile. Then if we speak about Akash, it happens to be a medium range surface to air missile and Nag happens to be anti-tank missile. All of this can be very important from the preliminary examination point of view. And do note, when we speak about the Integrated Guided Missile Developmental Program, this was initiated back in 1983 under the leadership of APJ Abdul Kalam ji. These are some of the important facts from the preliminary examination point of view. Now let's look into the next practice question. Which one of the following best describes the term greenwashing? Conveying a false impression that a company's products are eco-friendly and environmentally sound, non-inclusion of ecological environmental costs in the annual financial statements of a country, ignoring the disastrous ecological consequences while undertaking infrastructure development, making mandatory provisions for environmental costs in a government project or program. The answer to this is conveying a false impression that a company's products are eco-friendly and environmentally sound. What is greenwashing basically? You would have one of the companies. This company may release a product into the market. While it is releasing this product into the market, it may put out as an agenda, as a marketing tool, that all its products are environmentally friendly. But unfortunately, it may not be environmentally friendly, but the product is released as environmentally friendly, eco-friendly, and as a result, this is called as greenwashing. Though ideally, it should have been so, but it is not, which is called as greenwashing. This happens to be a previous year question from the year 2022. Now let's look into the fact of the day. The fact of the day for today's discussion is in reference to IPC section 295A, which we have taken from the Indian Express. What is the bare act of section 295A of the Indian Penal Code? It mentions deliberate and malicious acts intended to outrage religious feelings or any class by insulting its religion or religious beliefs. Whoever, with deliberate and malicious intention of outraging the religious feelings of any class of citizens of India, insults or attempts to insult the religion or the religious beliefs of that class shall be punished with an imprisonment of either description for a term which may extend to 3 years or with fine or with both. What do we understand by this? We have something called as the chapter 25 of the IPC, which deals with offences relating to religion. So if there is an individual, this individual has spoken against another religion or insults another religion or has a malicious intent or wants to instigate people so that there is peace and order that is disturbed and the tranquility is disturbed, such is what is called as section 295A. So a person committing this act can be penalized under section 295A of the Indian Penal Code. So what is the section 295A? It is that person who vitiates the environment, who creates ruckus in the society, who has a malicious intent and who provokes the society basically by creating a problem within the religious communities. So the acts that are deliberately performed with pre-planned and evil intent to hurt a particular group's religious sentiments or religious values are a crime prosecuted under this particular law. So if we look into this particular law, this happens to be a cognizable offense. Since it is a cognizable offense, the police officers need not have to take the permission from the court, and if a person commits such an act, they would be able to directly go and arrest that particular person. Now let's try and understand what are the origins of this section. When we look into the first Indian Law Commission, it was headed by T.B. Macaulay, who drafted the Indian Penal Code, who had written to the Governor General of India back then in 1835 and said that there is perhaps no country in which the government has so much to apprehend from religious excitement among the people. So if we look into this particular word, if you look into these wordings given by Macaulay, he goes on to say that back during the 1920s, what we had is a communally charged atmosphere in the northern part of India, which is why he had to come up with what is called as Section 295A, which ultimately entered the law books back in the year 1927. We have one of the cases called as the Rangila Rasul case. What is this Rangila Rasul case? This was a case where a publisher had written about the private life of Prophet Muhammad. This had evoked criticism from the large section of the people. So what do? They go to the Punjab and the Haryana High Court. The Punjab and the Haryana High Court looks into this particular case, and it does not accept this particular case under 153A of the Indian Penal Code. Why? Because this was not targeting the religion, but it was targeting religious figure. Since there wasn't a particular section back then which wasn't speaking about religion, which is why we have the introduction of what is called as 295A. So basically, originally it was not part of the Indian Penal Code, but because of the vitiating environment that we had during the 1920s, we had this particular section introduced in the Indian Penal Code. So this particular law was also checked for its constitutionality after the independence movement as well, and in Ramlal Modi versus the state of Uttar Pradesh, the Supreme Court of India clearly classified that we need this particular section, and this also happens to be a reasonable restriction under Article 19. So the Supreme Court of India clearly classified that this happens to be a constitutional one, this is a legal one, it is not unconstitutional, and it went on to say that in order to control the public order, what we have to preserve is this particular section. So remember, the Supreme Court of India has said that Section 295A of the Indian Penal Code is constitutional, and that is what we have to understand from this article. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.